Andrei Markov wasn't flashy, but in his prime, he was Montreal's silent general, controlling the pace of every shift, running the power play with precision, and standing out as one of the most underrated defensemen of his entire generation. He logged massive minutes, delivered multiple 60-point seasons, and steadily climbed near the very top of the Canadiens' all-time record books. But then came devastating knee injuries, bitter contract drama, and the heartbreak of finishing just 10 games short of the 1,000-game milestone in Montreal. Even so, his intelligence, adaptability, and quiet leadership made him the backbone of the Canadiens' blue line for well over a decade, shaping the team's identity through both highs and lows. Today, we'll uncover just how good Prime Markov really was, and why his legacy still sparks debate among Habs fans and hockey historians alike. Andrei Markov wasn't supposed to be a franchise cornerstone. Drafted in the 6th round of the 1998 NHL Draft, 162nd overall, he entered the league with little fanfare. Most late-round picks never see NHL ice. But then, Montreal scouts saw something. A poised Russian defenseman who understood the geometry of the rink better than most prospects. He joined the Canadiens in the 2000 to 2001 season, a year when Montreal was far from its dynastic past. Yet, even in a rebuilding roster, Markov's potential was obvious. He wasn't the biggest guy at 6 feet 0 inches, nor the most physical, but his vision was exceptional. Coaches trusted him quickly because he didn't panic under pressure. Therefore, he became a steady presence early on, posting 22 points in his rookie year and showing signs that his offensive instincts weren't just flashes of creativity, they were sustainable tools. By 2002-03, he had 37 points, anchoring a blue line that had struggled for identity. His calm puck movement allowed forwards to attack with confidence, and his quiet personality fit perfectly into the culture of Montreal's demanding fan base. The mid-2000s were Markov's true prime. From 2005 to 2009, he was one of the league's most dangerous power play quarterbacks. In 2007 to 8, he played all 82 games, scored 16 goals, and tallied 42 assists for 58 points. But then, the very next year, he outdid himself. 64 points in 2008 to 2009, ranking among the top defensemen in the NHL. His ability wasn't based on sheer athleticism. Instead, it was built on patience. While other defensemen relied on booming slap shots, Markov thrived on deception, a subtle fake, a perfectly timed pass, a sneaky wrister that slipped through traffic. His chemistry with forwards like Alex Kovalev and later Tomas Plekanec turned Montreal's power play into a lethal weapon. Therefore, he earned all-star selections and the reputation as one of the NHL's most underrated stars. Analysts at the time debated whether he deserved Norris Trophy consideration. While he never won, his name consistently appeared in conversations. Advanced stats, though not yet mainstream, hinted at his dominance. His possession metrics placed Montreal ahead whenever he was on the ice. At his peak, Markov wasn't flashy, but he was indispensable. He played heavy minutes, often more than 25 per game, and Montreal's entire system seemed to flow through him. But then came the darkness. In 2009, during the season opener, Markov suffered a severe ankle injury after colliding with goalie Carey Price. The recovery took months. Just as he was regaining form, worse news arrived. Devastating knee injuries in 2010 and 2011 that required multiple surgeries. He missed nearly 2 full seasons, and whispers circulated, would Markov ever be the same? Some even questioned whether his career was over. Montreal, desperate for stability, had to scramble with replacements, and their blue line looked fragile without him. Therefore, his reputation took a hit, not because his skill diminished, but because availability is often the greatest asset. Critics argued he couldn't be relied upon. Fans, though, remained loyal, remembering how dominant he was when healthy. The injuries robbed him of speed, but they couldn't strip away his hockey IQ, and that set the stage for his next chapter. Markov returned, not as the same skater, but as a wiser veteran. Instead of relying on mobility, he mastered positioning. He read plays before they developed, intercepting passes and shutting down lanes with surgical precision. Therefore, even with reconstructed knees, he remained Montreal's most trusted defenseman deep into his 30s. From 2013 to 2015, he logged heavy minutes again, putting up back-to-back 40-plus point seasons despite limited mobility. His leadership qualities also became more visible. He was never the loudest voice, but teammates called him the General. Younger defensemen respected how he carried himself, always composed, never rattled. Markov's ability to reinvent himself extended his career well beyond expectations. Instead of fading into obscurity, he became a symbol of resilience, showing that intelligence could compensate for lost physical tools. By the time Markov played his final game in Montreal, his place in the team's history books was undeniable. He had spent 16 seasons wearing the Canadiens sweater, and when you look at the numbers, his name sits right alongside some of the greatest defensemen the franchise has ever known. He finished near the very top in games played, ranked among the best in goals from the blue line, and was second only to legends when it came to assists and overall points. For a player drafted in the 6th round, the idea that he would one day be mentioned in the same breath as Hall of Famers seemed almost impossible, yet Markov carved out that space for himself through sheer consistency. But then came the inevitable comparisons to the dynasty-era defensemen of the 1970s. Larry Robinson, Serge Savard, and Guy Lapointe were more than just great players. They were pillars of championship teams, collecting Stanley Cups and Norris trophies as part of Montreal's unstoppable machine. Markov never had the luxury of skating behind a roster stacked with Hall of Fame talent. He spent much of his prime years carrying teams that struggled to stay competitive, and therefore his accomplishments were viewed through a harsher lens. For some, that lack of playoff success and hardware made it difficult to put him on the same level as the dynasty legends. And yet context matters. While Robinson had Lafleur scoring goals in bunches and Dryden holding down the crease, Markov was often the lone constant on rosters in transition. His ability to make average lineups appear competitive was itself a kind of greatness, one that is harder to measure with trophies but impossible to ignore if you watched him night after night. Advanced analytics, which grew in popularity later in his career, supported the eye test. Montreal controlled possession far more effectively when Markov was on the ice, and he consistently elevated whichever partner he was paired with. Therefore, the debate over his place in franchise history isn't about whether he was good enough. It's about how much weight to give team success when judging an individual's career. Markov may not have lifted the cup, but his influence was undeniable. For over a decade, he was the Canadiens' most reliable anchor on the back end, bridging eras, stabilizing lineups, and setting standards for the defensemen who followed. In that sense, he doesn't just belong in the conversation with the franchise's greats. He represents what greatness looks like in a different era, one where loyalty, consistency, and quiet excellence mattered just as much as parades down St. Catherine Street. Markov's career is also remembered for the milestones that slipped through his fingers. After 16 seasons in Montreal, he had played 990 games for the Canadiens, just 10 shy of the magical 1,000 mark. For any player, but especially one who had dedicated his entire career to a single franchise, reaching 1,000 games is more than just a number. It's a badge of honor, a milestone that cements a player's bond with both the team and the fan base. But then, just when it seemed inevitable that Markov would cross that threshold, negotiations with management broke down. In the summer of 2017, Markov wanted to stay in Montreal. He had made it clear that finishing his career with the Canadiens was his preference. Yet the team's general manager at the time took a harder stance, citing concerns about his age, his declining mobility, and the salary cap. Rather than finding a compromise, the Canadiens let him walk. Therefore, a player who had been the backbone of the defense for nearly 2 decades left the NHL without a proper farewell, forced to continue his career in the KHL. For many fans, it felt like a betrayal. Couldn't the organization have extended him for a single season or even a short-term deal that would allow him to reach 1,000 games in Montreal? It wasn't just about sentimentality, it was about recognition for everything he had given to the franchise through years of loyalty, leadership, and sacrifice. The decision left a sour taste, one that lingers to this day whenever his name is brought up. What made it sting even more was that Markov still had something to offer at the time. He wasn't in his prime, but his intelligence and passing ability meant he could still help on the power play and in sheltered minutes. Instead, Montreal cut ties abruptly, and fans were robbed of a chance to give him the ovation he deserved on home ice. Therefore, his departure became one of the most debated management decisions of the era, a moment when the Canadiens seemed to undervalue a player who had given them everything. Even now, years later, people wonder how different the ending could have been. Had the Canadiens allowed him to finish his career in Montreal, his legacy might have felt more complete, free of the bitterness that came with watching him close out his playing days overseas. Instead, the controversy has become part of his story, an unfortunate asterisk in an otherwise remarkable career, and a reminder of how quickly loyalty in professional sports can be tested. When all the numbers and debates fade into the background, what lingers is Markov's legacy. He wasn't a player who dominated highlight reels or drew national headlines every week. He didn't overwhelm opponents with crushing hits or rack up Norris trophies. But then, if you ask anyone who followed the Canadiens closely during his era, they'll tell you the same thing. Andrei Markov was the steady heartbeat of the team's defense. His influence wasn't loud, but it was constant, shaping the way Montreal played from the early 2000s right through to his final season. Therefore, his impact stretched far beyond statistics. Teammates like Saku Koivu, Alex Kovalev, Max Pacioretty, and countless others benefited from his calm decision-making on the back end. Forwards knew that when Markov had the puck, plays would develop with structure and patience. Young defensemen who entered the organization quietly absorbed his poise and composure, even if he wasn't the type to give fiery locker room speeches. He led by example, showing that intelligence and composure could carry just as much weight as bravado. Over time, fans grew to see him not only as a skilled defenseman, but as the embodiment of loyalty and resilience. He came back from injuries that might have ended other careers, and he did it without bitterness, always ready to put on the Canadian sweater again. Even in seasons when the team struggled, his presence made games watchable because he gave the sense that someone on the ice still had everything under control. And now, with the Canadiens preparing to honor him, his story feels complete. Recognition has caught up to reality. For a franchise built on legends, adding Markov's name to the conversation proves that greatness comes in many forms. Sometimes it shines with trophies and banners. Sometimes, like with Markov, it's defined by 16 seasons of quiet excellence, earned respect, and the kind of steady influence that teams only realize they're missing once it's gone. Of course, no conversation about Markov is complete without asking the inevitable questions. What if those devastating knee injuries hadn't stolen entire seasons from him? What if he had been surrounded by rosters that could have made deeper playoff runs? What if the Canadiens had extended his contract just long enough for him to play those final 10 games and reach the 1,000 mark with the only NHL team he ever knew? But then, hockey history is full of players whose careers are shaped as much by circumstance as by talent. Markov's case stands out because he had already proven his ability to be elite before injuries struck. In his prime, he was producing at a pace that rivaled the best defensemen of his era, and losing those years cost him not only numbers, but also the wider recognition that comes with sustained dominance. Without those setbacks, it's possible he would have earned serious Norris Trophy consideration and cemented his place in league-wide debates about the top blue liners of his generation. Therefore, his legacy is both celebrated and haunted. Celebrated because, even with all the obstacles, he managed to build a career that ranks among the greatest in Canadiens history. Haunted because the full picture of what he could have achieved will never be known. Fans are left imagining a world where Markov wasn't sidelined during his prime, where he had the chance to lead Montreal on a deep playoff run, or where his farewell season ended with the celebration of 1,000 games. And yet, perhaps those what-ifs are part of what makes his story so compelling. They remind us that greatness isn't always about perfection. Sometimes it's about persistence, loyalty, and the ability to overcome setbacks while still leaving an undeniable mark on a franchise. For Markov, the counterfactuals add mystery, but the reality is clear. He was the Canadiens' defensive cornerstone of the modern era, and his influence will be remembered long after the debates have faded. So, how good was prime Andrei Markov actually? He was, without question, one of the most intelligent and quietly dominant defensemen of his generation. His prime years put him statistically among the best in Canadiens history. Injuries robbed him of Norris recognition and wider fame, but his ability to adapt and lead ensured he left a mark few others could replicate. He wasn't Larry Robinson, he wasn't flashy, but in his own era, he was Montreal's backbone, a general on the blue line, a master of subtle control, and one of the most underappreciated stars in the NHL. And now it's your turn. Where would you rank Andrei Markov among the greatest Canadiens defensemen? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more deep dives into hockey's unsung legends.